So is it possible that we are being wildly unfair to Dodge when it comes to the six pack? Are we improperly or unfairly maligning that thing and making a early decision to protest that in hopes that they bring back the Hemi again in the new Charger body style? I mean, yeah, I think we probably are, and I'm going to share with you why in just a second. Let's roll that mother intro. All right, so yeah, that little intro, that was a test take. I decided just to keep it and throw a little beep in there. Anyways, let's get started with this video today. And what I wanted to talk about was this six pack that's coming out. They're promising in June, even though we know how Dodge goes, how Stellantis rolls, which is promise, kick the can down the road, deliver it late, and call it the year before, and then expect us to walk in happy to buy it. But let's just hope everything goes as planned, and they launch this thing, they start delivering these things to dealerships. Let's also make the ridiculous assumption, which I believe it's a completely ridiculous assumption, that the dealers don't shoot themselves in the foot and screw this launch completely up with markups because the Daytona EV has been such a wild flop despite the incredible discounts on those things. They can't seem to get rid of them at the prices that they had hoped they would be able to do. And now they're going to come out with this six-pack gas version, and I got to expect the dealers are going to do what the dealers do, which is test the market and see if we're willing to run in there with our checkbooks and pay $25,000 over or any amount over. Now, I will just simply ask you all, which is not the topic of this video, will you please just make a pact and a promise with me and all of the Mopar brethren out there that we are not going to pay markups. We aren't even going to pay MSRP, that we will hold out, we will hold our breath, we will sit on the sidelines until these dealerships get back to reality. No longer will we allow them to charge us ridiculous and offensive markups and ridiculous and offensive add-ons like $500 for nitro fill, nitrogen air in the tires. Let's just decide now that's not going to happen, despite the fact that there are good reasons that we may want to at least give this thing a chance while we're waiting for the ultimate return. Hopefully, fingers crossed that the Hemi comes back. But there may be some embarrassment that comes with that if they bring back the Hemi in one of these Dodge Charger new body style cars, because these six packs may smoke them, may walk them, may destroy them on the highway. Absent a Hellcat version coming out in that let's call it the Charger Daytona body style, I don't know that we're going to be well served if they were to bring out a V8 in the Charger, and even if it was a 5.7, if your desire is to have a very fast car, you may actually, and I know this is hard for me to say, you may actually be pulled towards the six-pack. And believe me, it's hard for me to say this, and I got to say this because you're going to beat me up in the comments. But Brad, you're a diehard V8 muscle car guy, and the inline-six twin-turbo Hurricane is not a muscle car. I got to tell you, I don't think it's a muscle car either. With that said, it's going to be a ridiculously fast car if they don't screw this thing up. And I'm going to share with you why I believe this. But I do got to say that there's nothing like the deep grumble sound of a V8 engine, and I hate to see them go away, and I would love to see them come back. And I know some of you believe that, well, if we buy the six-pack, if that six-pack ends up selling, that Dodge will see no reason in bringing back the V8. And I believe that's an absolute legitimate concern, and something that if I was a business person running that company, if I found a successful car in this Hurricane, then I would probably not go down that road again, understanding that the world could change in a very short 4 years in new administration. The other ridiculous assumption I do want to throw out there is, let's assume while we're talking about this car that we go into a situation where they actually deliver a fully bug-free Hurricane inline twin turbo 6 high output engine. Let's assume that they deliver something that's not a nightmare, that's not a disaster, that doesn't blow up on us, doesn't have us in the shop all the time, because they've already been building these in the trucks and I believe Wagoneers, so they are working through bugs. Let's assume that there's a chance that despite this being a first-year model, that they may work through the bugs and issues and actually deliver a quality car. Now, that is a ridiculous assumption, because the reality of it is they probably won't. We'll probably get something that's junk for the first year, but I'm going to cross my fingers and implore them to go out of their way to make sure that this thing hits the streets in the most reliable, greatest form possible. And so with that said, let me share my screen. I went ahead and did a little breakdown and analysis that I had to share with you all just for thought. And I want to spur thought. I want you just to think about this. It's okay to comment below and say, no, I want a V8 or nothing. It's okay to say that. I feel that way too. I share that feeling with you. But I'm just looking at reality, and I'm a realist, and I just like to deal with facts. I like to deal with truths. And in here, I think we're dealing with something that is going to be a very interesting car coming to the market. So let me share my screen. All right, so I just did a little rudimentary breakdown here of these three cars. And let's assume that there's probably no way they're going to fit a 6.4 into these body styles, and it would probably be a 5.7, but maybe they can stuff a Hellcat in there, but this is probably going to be a challenge. So I'm just looking at the 2023 last call cars, which is the cars I own, the car I own, and so many of you own. And just to compare it, that we have loved, we have been madly in love with these cars and downright protest this abomination because we love this so much. But where does this fit into this whole story? Well, you can probably see now by just looking at the numbers. I've done the math. The Charger Daytona EV is an EV. I don't believe it should be compared to a gas engine car at all. It makes no sense. I've shared this before. It's like cooking a hamburger or a cheeseburger in the microwave versus cooking on the barbecue. One takes longer, but it's way better, and that's how I feel about these things. I don't want to waste my life sitting at battery chargers, and those of you who say, well, I charge at my home, well, congratulations on being well off financially, but there's too many people out there this would never work for because they don't and can't charge at their homes for many variable reasons. And it would take too long otherwise for some of them. So bottom line, sitting at charging stations is not something I'm interested in. So not the same thing. It's a lifestyle decision to go down this road. And this thing's having all kinds of issues, being a first year, nothing we didn't anticipate or expect. But let's look at the numbers, the mathematics, because I hear so many dealers talking about this thing, trying to sell it to us. It's 5,838 pounds, 670 horsepower, which is the flex they put on this thing. It's 670 horsepower. It's so fast. I hear this constantly. 627 pounds of torque, which is incredible. It's massive, of course, because it's an EV. It's what you're going to get with an EV. It's all-wheel drive, but I believe you can turn off the front, which ends up going to one motor, which cuts the horsepower in half and creates a situation where this, quote, muscle car cannot do a burnout. So I'm going to leave it as all-wheel drive because anything other than that takes away from this horsepower because you lose the front motor. 134 mile an hour top speed, 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds, which is respectable, but it's an EV. You're going to get beat by a Model 3 Performance Tesla, and a quarter mile in 11.5 seconds. So not horrible, but you would think with that kind of horsepower it might do a little bit better, but what the killer is this weight, 5,838 pounds. Now let's talk about the Charger, the 6.4, which is what I have. I have a Challenger, actually, but the bottom line is Charger 6.4, 4,385 pounds. We've all talked about it. It's why there's so many boat memes about these cars, talking about, oh, you're driving a boat, and Mustangs kill it, and everything's faster than it. But we still love them because it wasn't always about how fast it was about how fun it was. And yes, it will do burnouts, it will do donuts, it will do all kinds of fun stuff. And it's just a simple car, rear-wheel drive, big V8, and in my experience, reliable and a beautiful-looking car. But that's a 485 horsepower engine, which I've always said at the 6.4, if they could have gotten that thing to 525, 530, I mean, that would have been the perfect horsepower for that car, in my opinion. Not that I think 485 is too low. I mean, it's been fine. It's a fun car and it still gets up and moves. But I think just a little bit more would have made this thing absolutely perfect. 475 foot-pounds of torque. It's rear-wheel drive and a top speed that I've been able to find, not that I've experienced it, of 175 miles per hour. 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds, which I will tell you I've never been able to accomplish anything close to that. So a second slower than this monstrosity. You get this thing, which is a lot more fun. I'm willing to give up a second. I'm not looking to win any big races here. Quarter mile at 12.7 seconds. So another little bit more than 1 second on the quarter mile. So again, there's always going to be faster cars out there. But here's where things get interesting. The Charger SixPack HO. Now, I dug, and the best information I could find, and mathematically this makes all the sense in the world. You've got a 4,200-pound car is what they're expecting this thing to weigh, what I've been able to find online. And the math works, because if you take 5,800 pounds minus about 1,300 pounds for the battery, so once you remove the front motor and the Fratsonic exhaust, which is probably a few hundred pounds, you pretty much land in the low 4,000-pound range for the SixPack HO, which takes us over here, 4,385 pounds for the Scat Pack 6.4. We're only about 200 pounds lighter, but we're lighter. But here's the kicker. We're going to have in the high output version 550 horsepower, which makes up for what I believe we should have had before. So you've got about 200 pounds lighter. You've got 65 more horsepower. But what about torque? Well, I can't find torque numbers yet on this thing. But if we're looking at 475 pounds of torque on the Scat Pack, what I was able to find here in the Ram HO was 521 pounds. So let's assume that they're somewhere near that. We got to expect that this twin-turbo i6 is going to have some serious torque. More torque, they're saying it will have, than the Scat Pack, but definitely not as much as an EV. So somewhere in the middle here, we're going to have some pretty powerful torque. And then we've got a drivetrain that is all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive at the push of a button. So you can simply push the button and you will then go to rear-wheel drive with all the horsepower versus over in the EV where you drop to half the horsepower. So this thing will have more horsepower than the EV because you're not turning off a full motor here. You're just simply disconnecting a drive shaft, if you will. So now you've got 550 horsepower and you're able to do ridiculous burnouts, which you cannot do on this EV. You can do on the 6.4, of course, and you've got this awesome flip back and forth all-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive. So here's the deal. If I'm on the track or I'm trying to get a 0 to 60 time and I don't have to worry as much about wheel spin, then I'm going to blow this thing away. I'm going to keep it in all-wheel drive and boogie down that track or from stoplight to stoplight with all-wheel drive, 550 horsepower, over 500 foot-pounds of torque in a 200-pound lighter car. I got to think this thing's going to walk Scat Packs all day long, and I'm not going to say it's going to walk Hellcats, but I'll tell you, many of you out there have said this in my comments, that you've beat Hellcats in your Scat Packs because the Hellcat spends so much time spinning its tires, and you were able to get traction. Well, in this case, with all-wheel drive, you've got the horsepower, you've got the lower weight, and here you are taking off from a stoplight and likely going to, and as those turbos spool up, I think you're going to give a standard Hellcat a run for their money. So that's why I think this is a pretty interesting option. I did put this down here. The Ram RHO, same engine, but tuned at 540 horsepower, weighs 6,300 pounds, and according to Google, it does 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. So 0.3 of a second slower than a 6.4 Scat Pack. I got to think at 4,200 pounds, we're going to get I mean, very likely under 4 seconds, 0 to 60 with this all-wheel drive and that horsepower. I mean, if they don't screw this thing up, this could be one hell of a monster. And remember, like I shared with you before, this thing is a very tunable machine. Assuming they're going to be able to get into it, this is a very tunable and moddable machine where the 6.4 generally isn't. 5.7 is, so if they come out with that, but you're going to have to spend a fortune to beef that thing up. For just $500, $600, you can go and tune that six-pack and take that horsepower easily probably to 650 in an all-wheel drive machine that weighs less than both the other cars. I'm thinking this thing could be a humongous win. Yes, I want a V8. Yes, I will take a slower car to have that grumble, that beautiful sound. And the six-cylinder will not sound anything like this thing, will not sound great, but there will be exhaust systems that come out that'll make it sound better. But I would love your opinion on this thing. Am I out of my mind, or is there a chance that when people get a hold of this thing, assuming that it's reliable, assuming that it's priced right, assuming the dealers don't screw this thing up, that this is going to be a street monster? It's going to go out there and do some pretty ridiculous things on the road compared to the cars that we've had previously, and definitely compared to the stupid Daytona EV thing. I got to think, and then when the tuners get a hold of these things and start modding them, and they start doing performance engine mods on these things, that there's going to be some pretty ridiculously fast six-pack HOs out there. I just wish they would have called it a Scat Pack instead of calling the stupid EV thing a freaking Scat Pack, because that's just blasphemy in my opinion. So with that, everybody, please like, subscribe, comment, share your thoughts respectfully, of course, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.